God, I'm so glad to be back. This is amazing that I'm back on the channel. Been off for a few months, but I'm back and I'm so glad to be back. Thank you for all the subscribers that stuck around. Thank you for all that you've subscribed, and for all the views that I've had on the channel. So thank you so much. Today I'll be covering the case of serial killer Stephen Port, who lived in the London borough of Barking and Dagenham, which is in the UK. Port, who was 41 years at the time, went on a 16-month murder spree between 2014 and 2015. Port murdered 4 young gay men who he had lured over the internet via bisexual and gay networking sites. Yeah, I would just like to say that this did break the community, and as always, my prayers and thoughts go out to the victims, their families and their loved ones. Yeah, this case was a little bit close to home for me, really, because I used to live in Barking, and around the time that these murders were happening as well. Now, Barking is a very multicultural community. At the heart of Barking, we've got the Barking station and we've got the Barking market. And to be fair, it's not the best place in the UK. It's got its fair share of crime, but I did enjoy living there.
Emergency ambulance. What's the address of the emergency?
It's Cook Street. There's a young boy. Looks like he's collapsed outside. I don't know.
Outside of which number?
4758.
Sorry?
4758, I think.
47 Cook Street.
Yeah.
What area?
Barking.
Okay.
It looks like he's collapsed or had a seizure or something. He's just always just drunk. But yeah.
What's the telephone number you're calling from?
I'm just pulled up in the car. I've got to get my car on the parking. Oh.
That's alright, don't worry about that. What's the telephone number you're calling from? Hello?
Hello?
Hello, it's the ambulance service. We'll look over there. Just confirm the location.
Oh, I've just driven away now.
Where was it that they were outside of?
Cook Street.
What's your number?
I don't know, I didn't look.
You said 47 before.
Yeah, so that's yeah, what's 47? Yeah.
Do you think that they had a seizure, is that correct?
It's no, floor. Yeah. Yeah.
So were you passing by in your car?
Yes.
Okay, and you've drove past now, you're no longer there.
That's right.
How old did he look roughly, sir?
20.
20. Do you know if he was awake?
No.
Do you know if he was breathing?
No, I don't know.
Did you see anything happen at all?
No.
No. You just think that he possibly had a seizure, he was lying there on the floor?
Yes.
Okay, well, we've arranged some help. We'll get someone there as soon as possible. If you do get any further information about his condition, please call back immediately on 999.
Of course.
Thanks for letting us know. We'll get someone there as soon as we can.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
That was the 999 call that Stephen Port made to the emergency services in the UK after murdering 23-year-old Anthony Walgate on the 17th of June 2014 and leaving him propped outside his flat up against a wall. We believe this was his first victim. Now, during that 999 call, I listened to it myself and I was like, well, that's pretty dodgy. just the way he was acting, the way he was speaking, the ums and the ahs that were in there. One thing I did actually notice, which stood out to me, was when the 999 operator asked how old he thought that the young man was, he said 20. He didn't say, in his teens or between the ages of 20 and 25. That kind of struck out to me. So that was a little bit of a red flag for me. And also when, obviously you heard there, he ended the tape. He got a bit flustered and he put the phone down. 999 operator managed to call him back, thank goodness. But at that time, Paul was actually driven away from his flat and was actually driving into work as if nothing had happened. Now, when emergency services attended the scene at Cook Street, they found the lifeless body of Anthony Walgate propped up in a seated position against the wall outside the property with his legs crossed. Now, the paramedics that were on scene was obviously aware that they were told that, this person had possibly had a seizure, was possibly drunk. Initially, the paramedics couldn't smell any alcohol on Anthony, and it was highly unlikely that, if he'd had a seizure, that he would be sitting there cross-legged. So rightly so, I would have done the same thing. The paramedic contacted the police because he felt that the scene was suspicious. He covered Anthony with a blanket and waited for the police to arrive. Anthony had been fatally drugged with a lethal dose of GHB. And despite bruising and blood found on Anthony's torso, the police did not treat the death as suspicious. Anthony was studying fashion at Middlesex University it comes under in London. He's originally from Hull, which is a city in East Yorkshire in England. He was openly gay out to his family. He was bubbly, he was passionate about his fashion, and to get by at uni, to make some extra money, he advertised on a gay website for escort services, and this is where he met Stephen Port. After messaging each other over the escort site, they agreed to meet. Now, Port agreed to pay Anthony £800 if he would go to Barking to his flat and spend the night with him, and Anthony agreed. But Anthony wasn't a silly boy. He had plenty of friends, and he told them where he was going, who he was going to see, gave them the address, anything, so they knew, where he was if anything was to happen. That was his safety measure he put in place. When Anthony didn't return home, his friends became very worried, obviously. After a few days, they did report him missing to the police, and they advised the police, of where he was going, which was Barking, and who he was going to meet, Stephen Port. He was taken down to the local police station and he was interviewed. He explained in the interview that, yes, he was with Anthony, and they had engaged in sexual activities and they'd taken some GHB, and that Anthony had taken too much in the flat and that Paul didn't know what to do with him, so he took him downstairs and positioned him outside the flat and dialed 999. On hearing this, the police arrested him for perverting the course of justice. Yeah, basically just misleading the police. So he was arrested and charged. Stephen Port was bailed to attend court at a later date. The police did not even look at Anthony Walgate case again or to have another look at it. They still put it down as an accidental death, as in an overdose of GHB, and still did not put it down as a suspicious death. So just who was Stephen Port? In his early years, he'd been described as a loner, bullied, a very quiet lad. When he got to his 20s, he came out as gay, openly gay. His dream was to go to art college, but unfortunately his parents couldn't afford that. So he chose an alternative career and went down the route of becoming a chef. And even during that time when he was a chef as his profession, he actually had a stint on a cooking show on British UK television, and he was filmed for an episode of that. He had a lot of insecurities about his looks, particularly he had quite a receding hairline. He was quite bald on top, and to cover this, I suppose, he used to wear a toupee. He was quite fit in himself. I mean, his body was quite fit. And when he was advertising on all these internet sites, he advertised himself as a lot younger than what he was. And to be fair, considering what he really looks like and what his profile pictures look like on the escorting sites, he didn't look too bad. So I can see why some of the young men involved in this case were misled. In addition to this, Stephen actually put himself out there as having gone to Oxford University, and he also said in his adverts that he had been with the Royal Navy, and that he was currently a teacher. He wasn't a teacher. He hadn't gone to Oxford, and he's never been in the Royal Navy. In fact, at the time he was working at West Ham Bus Garage as the chef there. Stephen Port's reign of terror had just started. He'd gone on away with murder, and he continued to advertise for escorting services, of particularly directed at young men, on the gay websites. And this is where he met Gabriel Cavari. Now, Gabriel was a 22-year-old gay man that had just come to live in London from Slovakia. In Slovakia, he had completed university, and his hopes were to come to the UK and work for the NHS as a translator. So Gabriel had secured lodgings with a gentleman named John Pape. So he was going to live with him, board with him. However, this didn't last very long before Cavari actually moved out of the flat. There was nothing between him and Pape. He had just decided that he was moving on. In reality, Cavari had been speaking to Stephen Port over internet sites, and he had left Pape's house with the intention of going down to live with Stephen Port in Barking. Cavari moved in with Port on the 23rd of August 2014, and he was only there for a matter of 5 days before his life would be cut tragically short. When Cavari moved in with Stephen Port, he became close friends with his neighbour, Ryan Edwards. They spent, although Cavari was only there a matter of 5 days, he spent a lot of time in Ryan Edwards' flat, and they spoke. Ryan Edwards reports that during these days that Cavari had sort of said to him, Stephen Port's not the man he portrays himself to be. And he also said that he was actually scared of Stephen. On a separate occasion, Cavari had even told Edwards that Port had been violent towards him. On the 28th of August, a dog walker who was walking her dog in the grounds of St Margaret's Church in Barking, which is just a stone's throw away from Stephen Port's flat, might I add, she came across the lifeless body of Gabriel Cavari. He was in the graveyard, propped up against a wall. The dog walker noted that Gabriel was actually wearing sunglasses, so she went up to him and she gave him a bit of a shake to see if he was okay. Maybe he was just sleeping, and it was then that she actually realised that he was deceased. In very similar circumstances as Anthony Woolgate, Gabriel Cavari had also died from a fatal overdose of GHB. Once again, investigators did not rule the death as suspicious. Gabriel was not subject to a forensic post-mortem, and there were no swabs taken from his body or his clothing. Gabriel had a boyfriend at the time who was living in Spain. Despite police knowing this, and despite the boyfriend actually contacting police and telling them that he had received a suspicious email from Paul, disguised as another person, well, they didn't know at the time, the police did not follow up on this. If that email had been traced back to its origin, it would have led the police straight to Stephen Port. Gabriel had also sent photographs of inside Stephen Port's flat when he had arrived there, and sent these pictures to a friend of his, and this lead was never followed up either, despite the friend being the last person that Gabriel had actually spoken to, besides Paul, obviously. I also need to say that the family liaison officer that was assigned to Cavari's case, wait till you hear this just blew my mind, they didn't even contact Gabriel Cavari's family to let them know what happened. Didn't tell them nothing. And Barking and Dagenham police insisted that the Anthony Woolgate case and the Gabriel Cavari case were not connected. On the 20th of September 2014, just 3 weeks after Gabriel Cavari's body was found, the same dog walker, you heard me right, the same dog walker found the lifeless body of Daniel Whitworth in virtually the same place in St Margaret's Church in the grounds. Daniel was just 21 years old. This poor dog walker, she described that when she found Daniel, his top half of his clothing were kind of pushed up against his chest, and he was wrapped in a blue blanket. When police arrived on scene, they found that Daniel was in possession of a suicide note, which was in his pocket, handwritten. In this note, it said, do not blame the guy I was with last night. He had nothing to do with this. The supposed suicide note also said that he was responsible for killing Gabriel Cavari. Now, me, if I'd seen that, I'd be like, oh my God, that's suspicious. But police didn't think that. Nor did they find it suspicious that he also had bruising under his arms, as did Anthony Woolgate. And nor did they find it suspicious that he had a bottle of GHB in his pocket, or that he had been found in virtually the same spot as Gabriel Cavari just 3 weeks before. Daniel Whitworth was the youngest of the 4 victims, at just 21 years old. He lived in Gravesend in Kent. He lived with his father. His father had brought him up single-handedly. He was a single dad. Daniel had been homeschooled. Daniel worked as a chef. He was a pleasant, mild-mannered young man. At the time of his death, Daniel was in a long-term relationship with his partner, Ricky Worsley. When Daniel's dad was notified of his death and the subsequent suicide note, he tried to insist that they may have the wrong person because he just did not believe that his son would commit suicide. So police sent him a sample, not the whole suicide note, just a small sample of the suicide note to see whether he could recognise his writing. And his father, he said he couldn't be sure whether it was his or not. The police made no attempts to contact Daniel's partner to see whether he could recognise the writing at all. In fact, he wasn't even officially notified of Daniel's death. He said he felt completely left out of the investigation, and he even mentioned at the time that he thought the police were being very homophobic. There was a hearing that took place at Barking Town Hall, which recorded an open verdict. They couldn't rule out that a third party may have been involved. Now, John Pape, who was a friend of Kavari's, attended that hearing and asked detectives whether they were going to reopen the cases, to which he was told that no, there will be no further investigations. Stephen Port had gotten away with murder not once, not twice, but 3 times. On the 23rd of March 2015, Stephen Port went to court in regards to his earlier charge of perverting the course of justice. He was actually found guilty and he was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment and then to be released on a tag. Now, he only did just a little over 2 months and was released. Now, what I found out through my research was that when he was originally arrested for perverting the course of justice, the police searched his flat and seized his laptop, but it was never examined. If they had examined it, they would have found Google searches for drugged rape, date rape, unconscious boys rape, twink, which is a term for a young slim boy, and crucial evidence of videos of Paul having sex with unconscious boys. On September the 14th, 2015, the young lifeless body of Jack Taylor, aged just 25, was found in Abbey Ruins, which was just next to St Margaret's Church in Barking. It came to light that Jack had also died of a GHB overdose. He had been reported missing the day before by his family. Jack lived in the area, lived in Dagenham, and his family said that he'd gone out on the Saturday night with a bar with his friends, and then they reported him missing on the Sunday. Now, Jack's family didn't for 1 minute believe that he'd overdosed on GHB. Jack was a clean living good guy, was very anti-drugs. He wanted to actually join the police force. At the time of his death, he was working, as a forklift driver. His family, in particular, his sisters, pushed the police to actually do something, to actually investigate this. They even conducted some of their own investigations and started Googling Barking and GHB, and they come across the names of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari, Daniel Whitworth, and had all died in similar circumstances to Jack. And going back to the earlier murders, the police still had John Pape and Cavari's boyfriend, who was in Spain, pushing for the police to reinvestigate these deaths. Now, police were able to track some CCTV and found that he was seen in a bar on the Saturday night. He seemed normal. There was no indication that he was distressed at all. He seemed to be just having a nice time. Police also uncovered CCTV from Barking Station where Jack was identified walking with an unidentified male, but the police told Jack's family that he was separated from this male, so the unidentified male wasn't actually a suspect. But the police had got it wrong. The mysterious man on the CCTV was actually the last person to see Jack alive, and reluctantly they released the CCTV footage. Now, here's the first bit of detective work in this case. I'm saying that very tongue-in-cheek. Another detective who was involved in the Walgate case happened to be in the same vicinity when they were reviewing the CCTV, and he recognised the mystery man as Stephen Port. Stephen Port was finally brought in for questioning and arrested on suspicion of murder.
So did you have any involvement in the death of the male that we just spoke about a short while ago, Gabriel Cavari or Gabriel Klein?
No, I didn't know that.
So, were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party by someone else. The name I recognised one of the boys you mentioned before is normally at the parties and deals with administrating drugs.
Who's that, sorry?
Daniel. Organised. Sometimes he deals. He hands out the drugs to the guests.
Might help if I show your picture. I'll call this CRT 2. This is Jack Taylor. Do you recognise that mate?
No. No, I just don't recognise him. No. I don't pay full attention to the guys' faces when I've paid attention to the parties. But I don't recognise his face.
So you don't recognise his face?
I do not know. No.
And I mean, that's Jack Taylor, so you don't recognise
No, I don't.
Jack Taylor?
No.
So, have you ever slept with this male?
No.
Had sexual intercourse with him?
He doesn't look like the type I would go with myself.
He's not the sort of person you'd go for?
No, I tend to it's more younger, drinky boys, more younger boys, but not. He looks older. He could be similar to the type I've taken to parties, but I don't recognise him as being one of them.
So you don't recognise him as being one of them?
No.
No. Okay. And Jack, again, was found dead. It was on the 14th of September 2015. Stephen, did you have any involvement in his death?
I did not know. No.
Did you kill Jack Taylor?
I did not know. No.
Did you administer any drugs or noxious substances to him
I did not know.
with the intention of causing him harm?
No. Definitely not. No.
No. And you say you've never seen him before. Is that right?
That's right.
That's right. Okay, I've got another map here, CRT8. I'm just trying to show you as many maps of the area because it's not easy to get it all on one piece of paper, just so that we're clear really. And again, it shows your home address and it shows the church St Margaret, and behind it you've got the abbey and the primary school. In particular, the area around the walls of the abbey. Have you ever had any reason to go into that area?
No.
Have you ever been through into the abbey?
No, I haven't. No. No, I don't generally go to the church areas. No. No. I think once went to that church with my ex Danny. Went to the church on a Christmas day, and into the church. But that's as far as I got. As far as
You've not been into the grounds behind it, where you've got the old abbey walls.
No,
the grounds there.
No, it's a spooky, so I won't go there.
You've never been in there.
No.
In all the 8 years that you've lived across the road from the park.
I thought it was all private. I wouldn't go there. I think it's a private area. It belongs to the church.
It's fairly open, isn't it, when you go past? Would you agree with that or not?
And the fields, yeah. The field is, but the church bit behind the walls, we won't go past there.
Because 3 of the 4 people that have been found dead were found slumped up against the wall here of the Abbey.
Gosh.
Pardon?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that? So that's news to you, is it? Did you put them there?
No.
So obviously Anthony was found slumped outside your address with a large amount of GHB in his system. The other 3 men we've been discussing were all found over by the wall area of the Abbey. We can see on the map. Again, all of them were slumped against the wall with a large amount of GHB in their body. Can you account for that at all?
No, I can't.
I mean, Stephen, did you write this letter? Yeah, CRT 11.
No, I didn't.
The photos of it that's found with Daniel.
No. No. If you're not.
Are you telling us the truth, Stephen?
I'm telling you the truth, yes.
About the letter?
Yes.
So that was some of the police interview with Stephen Port. I just want to give my opinion on it. I'm not a body language expert by no means, but I do read body language as part of my day job. Now, Port maintained very little eye contact throughout the video, glancing up every now and then, but majority looking down. He was very childlike, wasn't he? His voice was quite... the tone of his voice was low, it was quite quiet. He was, had his hands between his knees, quite a childlike posture. And when being shown the pictures, of evidence pictures, there was prolonged viewing of them. He looked at them for a really long time. And I think that was probably to figure out what he was going to say after looking at the pictures. He was just giving himself some time, I think. I also noted in the video that there was some leg tapping. Now that could be anxiety, or it could be agitation as well. So now Port denied knowing or having any contact with Gabriel, Anthony, Daniel or Jack in his interview. He just denied everything, basically. He denied that he knew where they were placed after death, which is next door to where he lives, which is at the Barking Abbey, the back of the church. He denied ever going there in the 8 years that he's lived in Cook Street. And he also denied writing the suicide note, which he was shown. And I think where he, the deposition sites where he placed all 4 of his victims, or apart from Anthony, the first victim, I mean, that shows me that he's either lacks empathy for the victim, and he was very confident that he wouldn't be found out. Police finally collected DNA evidence that linked Stephen Port to all 4 of the murders. Port was charged with 22 separate offences, including 7 other offences of drugging and sexual assault. Port was remanded in custody until the trial began, and that was on the 5th of October 2016. Port stood in the dock and pleaded not guilty to all charges. On the 25th of November 2016, Stephen Port was found guilty on all charges. The judge had some harsh words for him and sentenced him to a whole life tariff. In the UK, that means that he will not get parole and he will never be released from prison. A whole life tariff sentence has been given in the past to Rose West, Peter Sutcliffe, who was the Yorkshire Ripper, and Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. A whole life tariff is the most that can be imposed on a defendant in the UK. Stephen Port is safely locked away for the heinous crimes that he committed in 2014 and 15. But the police failings in this case are unforgivable and need to be accounted for, so that the families can get complete justice. The Metropolitan Police were referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, which is the IOPC, for the way they handled, or rather not handled, this case. There were so many police failings. They failed to properly investigate any of the deaths at all. There were no witnesses. Witnesses were not interviewed, even though they were coming forward with information, new information. They were not interviewed, and that was not taken on board. Now, Stephen Paul had already an attempted rape allegation on his police file, and that was dated back to 2012. Now, that alone should have given indication for the police to look further into Stephen Paul. There's allegations of homophobia in the police, and that they were stereotyping the gay community, and they weren't taken seriously. The lack of forensic testing, that, initially that wasn't done. If they had done some forensic testing, it would have led straight back to Paul, and there could be 3 other lives that were saved here. The police were notified that when the body of Anthony Walgate was found, his family stressed to the police that his phone was missing, and they even asked the police to trace the phone, see if they could trace it, but they were told it was too expensive. To trace a phone would be too expensive. Parkin and Dagenham police were also accused of continuously dismissing family, friends and loved ones over their concerns that all these 4 murders were actually connected. Now, this brings me to the end of this case, and I know the families, particularly Jack's family, are still fighting for the justice they deserve. But for now, although Stephen is locked up and can't hurt anybody else, I really hope and I pray for the families, all the families that are in this case, that they will get their justice. I hope you found this case interesting. I did. Found it interesting and frustrating, to be fair. But I hope you have found it interesting. And if you'd like to listen to some more cases that I have, then please subscribe and press that like button. Okay, thanks for watching. Toodaloo.